Hi, my name is Thomas DeMarco. I'm a senior at AU studying physics, and this is my capstone presentation final. So over the last semester and some change, under Dr. Kasmaei, I have been studying the electrical and physical properties of memristors, and I've been simulating them numerically with computational tools, basically Mathematica. I have looked into some of the real-world applications and even more novel AI-driven applications. So let's get into some background. I was told the audience for this talk would be like 210 students. So what are the first things we learn about in 210, Intro E&M? We learn about fundamental circuit variables and fundamental circuit elements. We are told that there are these magical elements, the resistor, capacitor, inductor, with special electrical properties, some of which are written here. And these elements all relate 4 fundamental variables of E&M, those being the charge, fundamental for electricity, current, voltage, and magnetic flux. Now, these variables are described in Maxwell's equations, Ohm's law, all the entirety of E&M. We see, though, that there is something missing. There seems to be only 3 relations and 4 variables. There seemed to be an extra relation that could be drawn, and nobody spotted this. Nobody really paid attention to this or looked at this until the 1970s, when a certain Professor Leon Chua, electrical engineer and physicist, just made the argument of symmetry, that there should be, a 4th element, and there should be some relation between flux and charge. There should be a missing block. So in 1971, he comes out with his paper, basically announcing this 4th fundamental circuit element, dubbed the memristor. Now he calls a memristor, he dubs it a memristor from memory resistor, and calls it that any 2-terminal black body which exhibits a pinch hysteresis loop for any periodic input current signal, that's just any AC voltage or current, which will result in periodic voltage, obviously. And it will produce, a hysteresis in the IV curve. Any elements or any system, any thing we want to test that produces such an IV curve, according to Chua, is a memristor. So awesome. What does this do? What does this do? It was, laid out in his paper that such a device would change its resistance physically based on the charge that has flowed through it. In essence, such an element would retain memory, would retain history of its past, of the past signals that were, applied to it. This could have major applications, obviously, as, just standalone memory, but also, more applications, which we'll see later. It doesn't matter right now. The one was finally built in 2008 by the lovely folks at HP, and this was a really big deal because it was the first step towards, trying to create neural networks and more complex logic networks with memristors, because that really opened the floodgates to experimentally tinkering with these things. So whatever. What is a hysteresis? When I first heard that, I didn't know what that meant. Hysteresis is basically just a fancy word for one of these loops. that has a pinch right at the origin. This is one of the plots I made. I will go through the plotting the parameters and the math in the following slides. But I just wanted to show what we're trying to do, what we're looking for, what is a memristor and what I'm trying to do. And it was to produce these graphs. Now, compared to our other passive circuit elements, what would an IV curve look like for those? Well, for a resistor, Ohm's law, V equals what? IR. It's just a line, right? Just a straight line. For a capacitor and inductor, we basically have for a sinusoidal periodic input signal, we'll get what? Basically like a circle or an elliptical or an ellipse for both a capacitor and an inductor. Obviously not the same plot. But yeah, this is a memristor. In PHYS words, if it's pinched, it's a memristor, which really helped. It helped me appreciate the material more because it's expanded the definition from just some abstract, experimental result or some abstract formula to, oh, anything that exhibits these physical properties, that exhibits these characteristics can be called a memristor. I don't know. Interesting. So let's get into how these things work. How does a memristor actually work? So again, with some 210 background, a little bit of semiconductor physics, the HP memristor was basically this titanium oxide film sandwich kind of thing. It's very, very small. The scale, we're on the nanometer scale. And we have two regions, a doped and an undoped region of titanium oxide, again, with holes on this side, with holes in the doped and sinks in the undoped. The doped has lower resistance as a result. What am I trying to say here? I'm just trying to explain doped and just doping, I guess. So we know that the resistance and thus the memristor of such a device depends on its state, its history, its past. That can be specified to mean the width of the boundary between the doped and the undoped region. We can use that to basically as a function of memristor. And we get this equation. This looks intimidating, but this is basically just a weighted average of the resistance of the two regions. We have W and D is just, the ratio of each zone to the entire system. I'm moving my cursor. I hope you can see my cursor on my screen. And R on and R off are just the values of resistance for the doped and undoped regions. Obviously, R off is much, much, much higher. So again, we know that the memristor is based on its past, on the element's past, which means it's based on the boundary position. What affects the boundary position? The boundary position is affected by the electric field in the memristor and whatever signal you're applying to it. So now that's kind of like a feedback loop that feeds into it. So memristor is dependent on the total charge that's gone through the device. And what's most awesome about this is when you remove the signal, it physically remains the same. If it remains unchanged, and if you switch the signal, it will obviously turn off. Okay, so obviously physics major, we got to get into some math. This tried not to get too much into the weeds. This should look like Ohm's law, generally V equals IR, we have this memristor element that we can kind of equate to resistance in a way that's a function of charge. That's basically what we have over here. Again, I equals V over R times this memristor term. This is basically just Ohm's law. And I feel like you can see that pretty neatly. This is exactly the same equation we had from before that describes memristor as a function of the width of the region. To plot an IV curve, we want memristor to be a function of charge or some other metric, not position. So through some fancy we basically use this. It's like I was gonna say through some fancy math magic, but it's not. I just used this equation and inputted a sinusoidal voltage. I then could find phi of t, which is our flux. That's just integrating the voltage. So given a voltage signal, you can just integrate that, get the flux term here, and then you have your current term. And you already have the voltage, so you just plot V and I, and you get the hysteresis loop. Beautiful. What else did I want to say on this page? I wanted to talk about some of these variables. Yeah, Q naught. I didn't want these variables to just be up in the air. So R naught is one term that collects like 10 more relating resistance and the R on and R off of and the weighted average between the doped and the undoped region. Eta is just plus or minus 1. That's just indicates if the region is basically going to the left or the right. Delta R again relates the differences between the resistances. Phi of t is the magnetic flux that's given by integrating voltage. Q naught is, again, it's just a number. That's just a constant. It's the charge needed to move. It's the charge needed to move the boundary by delta D, delta X, but just a little bit. And it's just a number. It's just like 0.01 coulombs, something like that. And R naught, again, is just a collective of a bunch of other terms. So we do that and we get the hysteresis. Yeah. I wanted to explain all the variables. Yeah, okay. What else did I do? I also modeled MC circuits or memristor capacitor circuits. This is a very, pretty common thing to do in like, intro E&M or electronics labs playing with MC or RC, LC circuits. I realize here I don't have my labels on my plots. This is time and charge for these, and we can see on this first one is for the MC circuit charging and discharging. Obviously, the blue plots are for a regular RC circuit with the same resistance value as the memristor circuit, and the red and green curve just show whether the memristor was in the fully on or fully off position. Basically, the boundary is either all the way on the doped or all the way on the undoped side. And we can see that when the memristor is starts in all the way doped region, its resistance is lower. So that means it charges faster than both the regular RC circuit and the other MC circuit. The opposite is also true, where since it has a lower resistance, it also discharges quicker. And you can see that as, that obviously is lower. Here I have some of my code, some of my plotting parameters. Again, this was my driving voltage, just a sinusoidal wave. Omega naught and omega is the natural frequency scale of the memristor. R naught again is due to resistance. This is the minimum charge to move the boundary. This R naught. Yeah, okay, that's the initial resistance of like off, I believe. Might have to look at my code. But this is, wait, let me move my camera. This is my code. This is the equation from 2 slides ago. Obviously see currents, voltage over R, that's this term, and then we have that square root 1 minus crap over there. That gives us our function of currents, our current function of voltage and flux. Obviously, we pass it our input signal, our voltage. Oh, and we can integrate that to get the flux and basically just redefine that, and we get the current. And that's what I use to plot to get my hysteresis. Okay, so what do we use these things for? What do we use these things for? What do we do with them? Well, obviously I feel like the most immediate application is our AM cells, or resistive random access memory, a type of RAM, but specifically made using cells that change their resistance, i.e. memristors. These elements can be hooked up to each other and, grids or in networks, and can be used to mimic the synapses and of a human brain, and have been used to create neural networks and do work with like image recognition stuff. A little bit above my pay grade. Another thing another application memristors have found is solving mazes. This is traditionally a computationally intensive problem, like computer science wise. The solving, the resolution, the solving of a maze gets, I want to say, exponentially more complicated. I don't know if it's actually exponentially, but it probably gets a lot more complicated as it gets bigger. And memristors were proposed to, fill that hole in maze solving, question mark. How it works is memristors, just a simple memristor and a switch, can be set up in any grid like pattern, like a maze, exactly like a maze, like a maze. And depending on whether the switch is set to the on or off position, that would indicate a wall or an open passage. So any standalone, maze could be recreated with this grid pattern maze thing of memristors. And solving it would be as easy as applying an input signal at the beginning, at the entrance of the maze and the exit of the maze, and allowing the signal to pass through. And once some time has passed, you can remove that signal and test the memristors, to each memristor, to find out what the path is, and find the path to solve the maze. And the way you test a memristor, you sample a memristor, is just also applying a pulse signal to read the resistance of it. So looked into this. I was supposed to change slide. With the help of Mathematica and Professor Kasmaei, we created this grid solving system. Pretty straightforward because Mathematica has a lot of commands that allow us to basically set this up, like a grid graph, which legitimately sets up a graph, which does exactly what you think it does. It sets up a grid of points. And there's other commands, find spanning tree, which will find the minimum distance between the start and exit points of the maze. Obviously, we have the unsolved maze on the left and the solved mazes on the right. I could customize the number of sides, the complexity of the maze. But obviously, as the sides increase, it gets a lot more computationally intensive. This took about 5 minutes on my computer, maybe to output. Definitely gets more chunky to run on a computer. So, that's a possible application of memristors. Yeah. So what does the future hold for memristors? Well, there's a lot of ongoing active research, mostly private, I believe. One physical constraint is the scalability factor. When these elements get smaller and smaller, since the memristor physically relies on the field strength of the signal passing through it to change its resistance and change, its properties, the smaller that gets, the stronger the field, seems to be due to the inverse square law. Obviously costly to develop any new technology, but the payoff could be crazy. Another thing is deterioration of the actual material. Since these are very, very thin, nanometer thin films, the boundary upon, repeated signal, use, I guess, the boundary can deteriorate and the doped region can deteriorate. Composite metal oxide semiconductors are, I feel like, well established is an understatement for the last 80 years. So, will memristors overthrow the transistor and other semiconductors? Probably not. Maybe. I will be the first to know. Another thing that I thought was very interesting, I read in Chua's latest paper from 2014, was that he described any system or element or thing you want to study that exhibits these electrical properties can be called a memristor. And a lot of the biology and chemistry went over my head because I'm not an expert in that. But we did talk about organic materials, plants, even like amoebas and single cell organisms producing these IV curves, which I think is kind of interesting. The thought of hooking up an amoeba to a oscilloscope. I don't know. That sounds fun to me. That seems like good research dollars. Yeah, thank you. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'd love to talk about my research or the stuff. Thank you. Do you have questions?
Maybe if you want me to ask them.
Yeah, sure.
First, do you think you talk about they're not scalable right now. They're like too delicate. They deteriorate too fast. Do you see any future where they are like becoming commercially viable, and like how long might that take?
Definitely not the expert on this.
Okay.
I know the HP memristor was made with titanium oxide. I know there have been experiments with other different types of semiconductors and stuff like that and different coatings. I don't know how good those stack up against the titanium dioxide one. That could be an interesting study.
And you talked a little bit about AI, and you might not know this one because you're into the physics, less the computer science and the neural networks and that stuff. But are there certain parts of AI that memristors would be better for than like the current thing, like the way that it processes? Like right now, AI is pretty good at like taking in words as data and outputting words. Like, would it be better for analyzing images and stuff like that?
I have seen people use or talk about using memristive networks to analyze images. I've seen a couple of papers talking about that, about image recognition and like that kind of stuff. That doesn't really answer the question.
So it would be filling the gap, sort of.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. That's enough. That's enough questions.